You are good to go.
All right. Hello, everybody. This is going to be an introduction to open source software. I've given this talk to Careers in Code. I think now this will be the fourth time. And I think it's a pretty good kind of initial introduction for people that might not be familiar with what open source software is, why it's important, how it can help you, and kind of the bits and pieces of how to engage with a community. What are the different parts to think about? What can it do for you? Why would you even care about open source? A lot of different things like that. A couple of quick things to kind of cover. First of all, my name is Jay Balunas. I'm a senior software engineering manager at Red Hat. I've been at Red Hat Incorporated since almost 17 years now, working on lots of different things. And I'll go in a little bit of that where it pertains to open source, kind of as we talk through things. But one big thing, questions are always welcome. I'll pause every now and again. If you have questions, great. I'll try to have chat up as well. Although when I shared my screen, everything got a little mixed up. But the best way to learn is to ask questions. And so let's kind of go from there. I'm going to try to keep this to about, I don't know, 35 minutes, 45 minutes, and have some time for questions at the end as well. Um, so let's start off with a question of my own. How many of you have actually heard of open source software before or are familiar with open source software in general? All
I
right,
know.
one. All right. That's all right, because that's part of what this session is for, is to kind of give you an introduction there. So one of the first things I'll do is I want to show you some really widely known open source software projects that are out there. And the funny thing is, pretty much every piece of software you use, from your car, your phone, your TV, everything most of what you've been developing with, even locally on your laptops and your computers, are all have open source software within them. And these are just some of the open source software projects that are out in the wild. Android. So a lot of you have phones that have the Android operating system on them. That's an open source project from Google. Linux, which is what Red Hat is most known for early on, is one of the first companies that kind of became commercially successful selling free software. We can get into that a little later as well if you want. There's open source software languages, Python, PCP, Node.js, all the way to things like browsers like Mozilla Firefox. So if you don't like Chrome or you don't like Edge, you can use Firefox. And even ChatGPT, everyone's probably heard of that at this point, is actually based on an open source project called OpenAI. And that's also a company behind it, OpenAI, that you might have heard a lot of before as well. But let's kind of walk back a little bit, right? At the heart of open source is the concept of copyright. And now every time you write something or you create an image or a TV show or whatever it is, individually or as a company, you are creating material that is copyrighted. So if you write code and you put it up online, you own the copyright to your software, to that software code that you put up there. And so sometimes if we kind of take the software part out of it, sometimes people get in trouble when they take some images or things like that from the web, from various places on the web, and they modify it and they do something to it and they don't have permission. Now, usually nobody cares. Everyone passes memes around. It's fun, right? But when it starts to be a problem, when people get in trouble with copyrighted material, typically is when they try to do something more with it, right? They put it on a T-shirt and they try to sell a T-shirt, or they use someone's song and they don't, and for whatever reason, the owner of the copyright doesn't want them using that song, right? As an example that's probably been in the news recently. So that's kind of at the core, and then around that is licensing, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as well. So let's define open source software. So I'll read through some of this, and then we can kind of go through some of the different parts. So open source software is computer software that is released under a license in which the copyright holder, what we just talked about, grants users the right to use, study, change, distribute the software, that's a really important part, and its source code to anyone for any purpose. Now, there is some licensing limitations and stuff like that, but for the most part, that's a good definition of open source, the legal or not legal definition, but the open source software kind of meaning. There's a little bit more when people talk about open source in a community way, in an engagement sort of way. So anything can be open source. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But when I talk about open source software or projects, which we'll get into here, that's when we start talking about that second paragraph, right? So open source software may be developed in a collaborative public manner. Open source software is a prominent example of open collaboration, meaning any capable user can participate online in its development, right? And there's lots of different good reasons to do that and things like that. If you're interested in more kind of the nuts and bolts, I have some links here. I'll share the PDF with Max, who can kind of share this out as well. Any questions up to questions up to this point? It's okay if there isn't. All right. So why would you even care about open source? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I actually have a question. So whenever I'm on like GitHub and see other like projects,
Mhm.
um, does that count as like a open source when like you see like I guess the people who like worked on it, like you see like a whole bunch of people working on like this one thing. So would you like count that as like open source?
100%. 100%. And I'll actually show some of that a little later, where I talk about like some of the different projects I've been involved in, but others as well, like React um, is an open source project here, right? And kind of we'll talk about the parts of it, but absolutely. Now, that's not to say when we start talking about the actual definition of open source, and it's a very good question, right? When we start talking about the definition, just because I put software up on GitHub doesn't mean it's open source. Because there's a default license that isn't open, right? As if I put source code up on GitHub, it doesn't mean anyone can go use it. That's the licensing part that we'll talk about a little bit, and that's an important distinction. But the majority of projects you see up on GitHub, I don't know, I haven't done the math myself, but I would assume the majority of projects up there are open source in one manner or another. Um, so yeah, like I said, please shout out if you have questions. I'm glad you raised your hand. Um, so why would you even care as new developers even care about open source? Well, there's could be a few different reasons. One, uh, you might play a video game like me, and there's mods for that video game, and it's shared. And very often those are shared up on GitHub, and you can collaborate, create your own mods, right? That type of thing. Or maybe your own projects you have at home. My COVID project was I worked with an open source project that tracks airplanes um, using an antenna and a Raspberry Pi, right? So there's different things like that. But also, I think really important for this crowd is it can help you learn new skills, and not only learn them and improve them, it can help you prove them, right? So when you're trying to find an employment, you're trying to prove, yeah, I graduated this careers in code. Now I need to go prove to an employer I know what I'm doing. One approach, it's not the only approach, one approach can be working in open source projects shows an employer kind of a track record. You've contributed to a project, you've worked on issues, you've communicated in a professional manner, right? Things like that. Um, so that's a really important aspect. Other people just want to join a community. They want to be part of a group of people that are working on a hobby together, remote control car apps or whatever it might be. Another part is doing your job, right? Almost everybody at Red Hat in engineering, at least, we integrate, we fix, we add to, we create open source projects, right? I'll talk about kind of my quick journey in just a minute, but like it's also a lot of people work in open source, right? And so there's some opportunity here. All right, next up, So what can you do for open source? How can you help open source projects? Well, one, you can just go use the software, frankly. All right. Like just downloading and using React or using other open source plugins or software. You can build it locally. You can collaborate in the community, join the Discord, um, help answer questions when people have them, ask questions, that type of thing. You can create your own project. That might be a little bit more of an advanced topic, but if you're all creating your own projects already. Max, are you having them add licensing to their projects? Or
We don't, but they are public repos on GitHub, so it would be pretty easy to add that.
yeah, so you could, like, if you wanted to create, so if you're publishing up your code, it's not technically open source because you don't have a license applied to it. Now GitHub makes it actually pretty easy to do this, and I'll show you some examples. But another big thing about open source is, and what you can do with it is just bring new ideas and a different perspective, right? So I've worked with people all over the world every day, or not every day necessarily, but a lot of days, and different ideas, different approaches, things like that. All right, so I'm going to real quick go through kind of my open source journey. So I started in open source, honestly, back in 2005. My company I was working with started using an open source project called JBoss, and I had some of my first initial contributions, and I loved it. I loved being involved, and I met one of the contributors at a local meetup, kind of like Open Hack, and pretty soon I was like, no, this is what I want to do. And I started to interview at different companies and at Red Hat specifically. And I hired on at Red Hat in 2007. From there, I became a project lead after a couple of years of a UI project called Rich Faces. It has to do with Java server faces, different technology. I won't get into it, but it also gave me the opportunity to become part of what's called an expert group. So I was able to help set specs and specifications for how these projects would move forward. And when we talk about foundations in a little bit, you'll kind of get a sense of how foundations and things like that start to get in. Then I moved on and I created a new project called AeroGear. It's still up there right now. There's an aerogear.com, which is like a company that makes parts for aeroplanes. And then there's aerogear.org, which is the open source project. And I was the Red Hat mobile architect there. Had to do with mobile technologies and push servers and things like that. At some point in there, I joined the dark side. I became a manager. But even as a manager, I still remained very involved with open source, either as a committer early on. Honestly, I haven't committed in quite a while, but advisor or managing engineering teams that were working in open source. These are just some of the other projects I've worked in along the way. So, like I said, everyone's journey is a little different, right? And catch me at Open Hack if you're ever curious, or I'm also in the Syracuse IO Slack. Be happy to connect and talk to you about it more. Anyway, let's talk about open source projects, the basics. All right. So we were just talking a little bit. What's the bare minimum for an open source project? One, has to have publicly hosted source code somewhere. Two, it has to have an open source license, because otherwise the license is strictly yours, right? Technically, if someone used your code, you could sue them for copyright infringement and things like that. Most projects, however, have additional bits and parts, right? They have governance, which we'll get into, how a project is led, how are contributions handled? Is it part of a foundation? Are vendors involved? When I say vendors, I mean like Red Hat, Google, Microsoft, different companies that are interested in the same open source project, oftentimes are key contributors to it, even if outside people or outside experts or contributors are welcome. Next up, there's almost always a community presence around it, a website, GitHub repos, communication channels, Slack, Discord, whatever it is. And then ideally, there's guides for how to contribute, right? So it's literally a contribution guide. I'll show you an example in just a minute. And then code of conduct, how they expect people to behave while they're contributing code and engaging with the community. So I've talked a lot about licensing, kind of as just mentioning it. I want to dig in a little bit deeper on the licensing. I'll show you some specific examples and where you can kind of learn more about it. So licensing is crucial to open source. It's literally what makes it an open source project. So for one, licensing is what creates the community. It tells us how contributions are handled, right? You don't want to just contribute to any old project that does, depending on the license. You'll want to understand that a little bit. It's not, for the most part, you can go visit GitHub. I'll show you in a minute. It's really easy to kind of see what licenses projects have. Licensing also determines the business model. This gets more important when you start talking about redistributing the software. So if you use an open source project and you have it in your system, and then you redistribute that system, sell it, maybe charge people money, there's different things in the licensing around that. For example, if you have Apple CarPlay, or if you dig into your phone settings, or even on your TV, you can probably get through the settings, about, details, whatever. You're going to find a list of open source projects and licenses that it uses, because that's part of the license for some projects, that it has to be recognized within that. And licensing should be easy. So it should be relatively easy to use, as far as it should be consistent. If it's too complicated, you lose contributors, or, something Max and I have talked about in the past, with React, which is owned by Microsoft, or React is an open source project, but Meta, Facebook, is the primary controller over the project. Now, at one point, I don't remember the details, Max, but they changed their license, and it kind of put some people in an uproar, right? Do you remember some of that?
Yeah, so the details of it were WordPress, which is another huge open source software that powers a lot of websites on the internet. It's a content management system, and the most popular CMS. They wanted to use React to build the new version of their text editor. And they started diving into the license that Meta had chosen for React, and it basically was too restrictive for them. And so WordPress refused to continue development on this project that was using React, because they were worried that at any point Meta or Facebook could decide, hey, we don't want to continue supporting this project anymore, or we want to revoke this license. And it would basically break every installed version of WordPress. And they retain the copyright through the license that Meta chose. And so many developers kind of revolted against Facebook and Meta over that, and went, oh my God, we can't keep using React in our companies. If WordPress is afraid of this happening, imagine what would happen if Meta did change their mind and kind of say, nanny nanny boo boo, we don't want to support React anymore, we're taking our code back. And so that was such a big concern that Meta finally folded because of all of the WordPress pressure, and changed their license to be more open source friendly.
Right. Right. And that's where it's important that licenses are consistent. So literally on the next page, I'll show you some of the more common licenses that are out there. But that's a good example of where there was an inconsistent license. It was complicated, and it caused an issue. So let's actually jump. I'll switch over. There's literally a chooselicense.com page, which is actually it's actually from GitHub. But it goes through a lot of the popular licenses that are out there, and it talks about the permissions. So what does the license say? What does it do? What you can distribute this material, right? You can modify this material. Then there's things like, what are some of the conditions around it, right? A copy of this license and the copyright notice must be included with the licensed material, right? This is an example where you'll end up seeing it listed in like Apple CarPlay or whatever. You can kind of see that. And then there's limitations like liability. Are you liable if you contribute to an open source project? Are you personally liable if it's broken? Right? So that's partly, this is basically saying, no, you're not. Trademark use, like React is a trademark. It's got a logo and everything. Can you just use React logo wherever you want? and then a warranty. Most of the warranties say there's no warranty, but it's very specific, right? So Apache 2.0 and MIT license are two of the more common ones that I use and been involved in. Although there are some other ones like the GNU public license and different ones, and they all have a little different meaning. I'm not going to get into all of the differences there. Some are very restrictive, and I want to show you an actual license. So here's Keycloak. It's one of the licenses or one of the projects that I've used and been part of in the past, and that uses Apache 2.0. And this is literally, certainly not going to read this, but this is literally the license. This is the text for the license. It's very legalese. It's hard to read. I've read plenty of them. And thankfully, GitHub has a scanning tool where it basically tells you, is it a standard license? If this wasn't a standard license, it would tell you that there are changes to this license, which is kind of nice, right? And this uses Apache. And every repo in an open source project needs to have that license file. So if I go to Keycloak, the one I was just in, it has a license.txt. If I go to Keycloak benchmark, one of the testing ones, it has a license.txt. It's going to be the exact same license. All right. And so lots of different projects, like here's React, right? Where's theirs? License, right? So they have theirs, which uses MIT license, right? The standard. And so kind of good place. You can go learn more about the different licenses. Not going to get into the details here, but there is a spectrum all the way from like public domain. Anyone can use this for any reason, right? Like copyright free songs that you hear on YouTube and things like that, all the way to like trade secrets, the recipe for Coke, in the Coca-Cola. In the middle, there's proprietary licenses, there's protective open source licenses, and there's not protective open source licenses. So lots to kind of not really to think about. Most open source projects that you'll want to get involved in, this is pretty straightforward. But just to let you know, there's more there if you wanted to dig in. So we're going to jump over and we're going to talk about governance. So I really like this definition
from,
here.
Terry.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Terry.
Yeah, when you was explaining licensing, how would you know which license to choose, like for your like project? Like,
Right. So that's a good question. It really, my default answer is going to be, and it's going to depend on what you want to do with it, right? If you believe your open source project is about to take over the world and you want a very restrictive license that other people can use it, but they can't distribute it, there's licenses for that. Most licenses that I've worked with usually use one of these two, right? And the choice you'd be making is around people can use it, contribute to it. They can put it in their own products. They can use your library, add it in, and use it in Apple CarPlay if they choose to use it. They might have to include the license and copyright notice to say, Terry, this is Terry's project and this is the license that used, right? That type of thing. Because you want it as least restrictive as possible usually, right? So I tend to default to, like I said, Apache or MIT, because those are ones I've used a lot in the past. So it can be tricky if you get into like real like corporate startup type licensing. Sometimes it can be a little trickier, but you know, that's what lawyers are for in some ways. But yeah, if you're just wanting to start your own, that's what I would recommend. All right, another great question. So talked about the spectrum here. Let's talk about governance. So I really like this definition around kind of the difference between license and governance. Licensing is a legal framework for collaboration, right? It's the legal document of all the stuff we just talked about. Governance is the social framework for collaboration. How is this project? How are you going to work with this project? How do you contribute? How is it organized? Is there a benevolent dictator, right? It sounds horrible, right? But like, let's say, Terry, you created an open source project and you said, hey, this is my project. It does these cool things. And people started contributing. By default, that's kind of a benevolent dictator. You're the owner of the repo, right? So you can choose what PRs get accepted and things like that. Maybe you get a contributor that you give additional rights to. There's other types. There's hierarchy, meritocracy, there's foundation based. We'll touch on foundations next. It's all to say that there's different ways that projects are governed, right? And we'll get into a little bit more of that, but more about contributing. So next up, I've mentioned foundations a whole bunch. I've talked about foundations in a few previous slides. And when you hear it, I'm not going to dig in too deeply, but typically when you hear foundation, it's a not-for-profit charitable organization that supports open source software. That sounds really awesome. Know that most foundations are backed by vendors, by Microsoft, Red Hat, Google, others, because they all want to work together. It's kind of like, which is amazing if you think about it, as well as individual contributors. So individual contributors are part of a lot of these foundations, a key part of a lot of these foundations. So let's say, I'll use a not software example, USB. All right, everyone's got a USB. We all have our wires all over the place, right? Well, that's a standard. That's a standard that is handled through a specific foundation, and all the different vendors are part of it. And they say, I want to, I want it to be reversible, or I don't want it to be reversible, and all the different things, right? It's similar with software. So software foundations might say, hey, this is how you govern projects under us, and they provide legal protections as well. There's some things like the Software Freedom Conservancy over here. They're literally like part of their charter is they will help defend open source projects from copyright attacks and things like that. All right. So anyway, nothing too scary. Just if you hear it, different software projects can be part of foundations. It doesn't make them bad. It doesn't make them good. It's just something to know. So we're going to talk about communities. All right. So what's important to know about software communities is that it's exactly the same as any other community. There's some communities that are jerks, and there's some communities that are awesome and welcoming. And there's some communities that only communicate a certain way. And there's some communities that, only meet up in person or whatever it is. And so just keep that in mind. This is not a hard set rule for every community that you're going to run into out there. But most communities have websites, repositories, ways of tracking issues, mailing lists and forums and chat and Discord and Slack, that type of thing. And process. What's the workflow? How are decisions made? Now, I will say, and you've been exposed to some of this through the careers in code, GitHub has made a lot of that very easy, right? Like most repos just start with almost all of those things available, including the workflows and stuff like that. So GitHub is really been evolutionary in how open source projects have proliferated. What's interesting is GitHub is owned by Microsoft. I don't know if you knew that, but Microsoft bought GitHub however many years ago for, I think, $5 billion or something like that. And it doesn't make it bad. I think Microsoft has done a good job with GitHub. But just as, it's trying and helping with a lot of those different the different project aspects. Now, there's also a lot of different roles within a project. There's maintainers, there's leads. There might only be you, right? And you own the repo and you contribute to it, and that's it, right? As soon as you start getting people interested, people start getting involved, then you start seeing things where you start thinking about, well, geez, I can't review all these PRs. Shannon over here is really active. Maybe she'd like to review some PRs, and they can give rights and different things like that. There's lots of different ways to do that, all the way to governing boards, where you have basically like a board of directors for a project. Like Kubernetes is a huge cloud project, right? And it's part of a foundation, and part of that foundation is a governing board and stuff like that. You don't have to worry about that too much, especially getting started. But it's just good to know that there's a lot there if you want to dig in. But mostly you want to become a contributor or committer, be able to send PRs, work through issues, diagnose bugs, stuff like that. So let's talk a little bit more about contributing and codes of conduct and things like that. So Um, yeah, so just because you know Git doesn't mean it's easy to start to get going with open source, but that doesn't make it hard either, because most really good open source projects want you to contribute. There should be a contributing guide in the base of most repositories and open source projects. This should help you with things like, how do you build it? What are good issues to start to look at? Where do you post about issues? Where do you open up discussions? What's expected if you put a PR? Some of them will have certain things. Hey, put this in a PR so we can diagnose it easier. Communication expectations, stuff like that. Like, let me show you, like, here's Keycoat's contributing guide, right? And again, it's in the base of the thing. You'll see other ones. There's like governance and maintainers and things like that. Not going to get into all of that, but the contributing guide should walk you through kind of how do you test and submit a PR and stuff like that. So just things to keep in mind around that. And then a code of conduct. This is something I'm very happy to see in a lot of projects. A code of conduct is becoming pretty ubiquitous across open source. But the idea here is it defines how we expect our members, our people who communicate and contribute, to behave, right? And typically, it's, no trolling, no insulting, no public or private harassment, right? Different things around being respectful, right? That type of stuff. It's just stating it all out. This is what we expect, because there have been issues in the past with projects. People get fired up, they get passionate about something, and they have a hard time sometimes working through those. But you'll see that as well. So just keep that in mind. It might be something to look into. So how do you engage? What's the next steps kind of for you? All right. And so there's lots of different types of engagement with open source. You can just, as I mentioned before, you can just consume it. You can just be a user of open source projects like React or libraries or what have you. You can be a community member, right? You can be active on their forums or Discord. You can look at testing, perhaps. You can start to contribute, like documentation. Hey, I wrote up this documentation, or I fixed a whole bunch of stuff. Now, some projects have things like, don't just fix one line in documentation and submit it. It's not, they want you to batch up a bunch of stuff. But testing and test use cases and bugs and stuff like that. And then you can become a committer at some point. Start writing different modules or be part of the decisions. You can be a creator or an owner or a lead. Or be in part of like an expert group or advisor, or even a board member eventually, right, for some things. All right, so how do you pick a project, right? The number one question, well, there's a couple parts, but the number one thing for me is what are you trying to do? I guess there's two number one things. What are you trying to do? And what is the culture and community like? Because just like in real life, some cultures are toxic. Some cultures are awesome. Most open source projects I've been involved in have been very welcoming. They'll have like a good first issue, like list, and go try this and different things. But the first thing to think about is, why do you want to collaborate? Is it fun? Is it a hobby? Are you learning a new skill? If you're learning a new skill, you want to find a project related to that skill that's using that language, that's using that technology, that type of thing. And how mature is it? Is it Bob and Judy and it's 3 days old? Might have all the right parts. It doesn't mean that it's like ready to be actively contributed to by new people, right? So kind of keep an eye on that. How many people are contributing? Is it only people from one company? Are they letting other people contribute, right? Like, that's another important part. Is it part of a foundation? I kind of went through some of this already. So just some more stuff to think about there. It might seem obvious, but I will say I've let people know more than once, hey, could you read the contributor guide? Because they post something and they clearly haven't looked, and it's like, it's like right there, like, how do I do X? It's like the second paragraph in the contributing guide, right? So take a look at the contributing guide. It's likely expected that you have. Make a good first impression, right? Just like any new community, right? You want to be welcoming, you want to be curious, you want to work with them. And most communities, especially good communities, if you have a question, ask. Hey, I'm new here. How do I do X? Right? That type of thing. Most good communities will be happy to have those questions come up or point you in the right direction. All right, and then another piece of advice: start small. Don't jump into Kubernetes and say I'm going to be a contributor to Kubernetes today. Right? There's literally a really great first contributions little GitHub project that walks you through becoming a contributor to literally this repository and kind of walks you through that. It's not, I don't even think there's writing code here, right? It's literally just a pull request to update with some good information for moving forward with that. So take a look there would be some other advice. And then lastly, be curious, right? Be kind, be respectful, right? And that's the advice for any community. That's not just, that's not just open source. So with that, I think that's everything I had, but I want to have some time for questions. I completed in what, just 44 minutes. And so, yeah, if you have any questions, other questions, I threw some up here. One interesting one is, how does Red Hat make $5 billion a year selling free software? Why did IBM pay 34 billion for Red Hat? Right. There's lots of interesting things there. I can talk about that or other things.
You mentioned you was a project lead before. What was it like, and what role did you have to do?
Sure. So as a project lead, there was an existing open source project that I was involved in, and then I was asked to be the lead for it. So I was involved. I got the right rights in the community. GitHub wasn't around at that time, and got the right permissions, and I was already part of the group. And so I would help with reviewing pull requests and go through bugs and make sure the team members were kind of focused and working on the right things, or helping out new contributors, people to be like, hey, I have a problem, right? I'd give talks at conferences. So I'd talk about the Rich Faces project and, how do I do XYZ and all that type of stuff.
So, as a guy who wants to get into like game development, where should I go with that?
Sure. So I'm not really an expert on game development. There is a lot of open source game libraries and game development stuff. If you've been involved with modding, that sometimes gives you at least a foot in the door. If it's an area like, hey, I have experience at least doing this part. But I'm not an expert, unfortunately, on the gaming side of things. I know some of my colleagues have worked with open source gaming libraries to create little games of their own, stuff like that. Really good questions, though.
3 questions in the chat. Anwar, the slides I will post in Slack as soon as Jay shares them with me, so they will definitely be available. And then Jay, one question is, what licensing and copyrights get applied automatically when creating a public repo? And then 2, how do companies make money selling open source software?
Yeah, excellent. Good questions. So the first one is more of a legal question. This is where I'll put on I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not 100%. But if you don't put any licensing or any copyright information, I believe the default is it's whoever wrote it, right? So you are the copyright owner. And if someone used your software and you thought you could win a case against them, you could sue them for it. That type of thing. As far as licensing, there is no licensing. It would just be the copyright because you wrote it, right? If I put an image up on an Instagram that I wrote and made myself, that's copyrighted to me by default. Right? There's like Instagram, you can go look at the rules. It'll be like, you can't steal other people's work, and it's kind of like a light copyright, but it's a good question. And then how do companies make money selling open source? So Yeah. So Red Hat makes a lot of money selling open source software. What we typically do is it's a mixture of support. So Coca-Cola or UPS or whoever are customers, and they use RHEL, Linux operating system, the commercial version. We package a commercial version of the software, which is still available, by the way. And then they install it. And if something breaks, they want to pick up the phone and talk to somebody that's going to be able to support them, help them through it, that type of stuff. Same with cloud computing and others. And so much of it is through support contracts and licensing. So we actually do like a subscription type service, over time. There's also consulting. So consulting, helping groups and companies get started with open source, with our products that are based on open source. And so there's usually that mixture of approaches. And Red Hat was fortunate enough, I think, through the years to build up trust in different things. And like I said, about 5 years ago, IBM bought us. It closed in 2019. Red Hat's still Red Hat. IBM's been great, but we're still kind of a separate entity. But yeah, it's pretty amazing that they bought us for $34 billion. And most of our software was freely available. Right. But really good, another really good question. Valve and so the slides. Hack upstate. Yeah, anything else?
Is Red Hat located in Raleigh, North Carolina?
Yes. Yeah, so that's where it's headquartered. We've got offices all over. I've worked remote for 14 years. 15 years actually. So I'm in my basement right now. So my closest office is in Massachusetts. Go down to Raleigh every once in a while, that type of thing.
Okay, because I've been to Raleigh and I saw like a sign when I was on the highway, like the Red Hat Theater, and I'm like, is this the same thing?
Yep, it absolutely is. And there's the Red Hat Tower. It's got a red hat on it. It's got a big red top, which is actually kind of funny. And yeah, you actually get a red hat if you look behind me over here at new hire orientation. So yeah, I encourage, when you finish the course, if you're interested, take a look at some like the careers at Red Hat. I'm not pitching, right? I didn't come here to pitch, but if there might be some opportunities there. I've been working with our own internal groups to try to remove college degrees from intro positions, so like associate positions and incoming positions, so that it's not like only if you have a college degree, right? If you can prove experience. I've hired lots of people from our open source projects. So another great thing, it's like people already. I've been on the phone and said, hey, Pasos, do you want to do this full time and get paid for it? Uh-huh. Right. Was kind of one of the answers. I'm not saying that happens all the time. I'm not saying that's easy, right? But I'm just saying it is a way to prove some stuff there.
I have another question.
Yeah, please.
So, let's say like your software gets like big and stuff, and it's still like an open source. Would it be better to still have it open source, or like would it be better to like keep it like private? Because I know like some people like have like an open source like software, and then they turn it into like private. So I don't know how that works.
Right. So you can do that. It's a little tricky with some of the licenses we've talked about, where sometimes it needs to be like a clone of it. It can't be the actual repo, and there's lots of different aspects. I mean, you could, kind of the example that Max gave earlier about Facebook and Meta, right? If they said, you know what, we're just going to bring this internal. We're not going to, have the open source project. Their license allowed it, and that's where the outcry came from, right? So kind of pushing there. And then I just saw, Joe, your other question, some tangentially related. I once heard that proprietary software still has to be copyrighted. proprietary software is absolutely copyrighted. And devs should avoid looking into any of the source code. Usually that source code isn't available if it's proprietary. But there are times when you're talking about acquisitions and other things where you have to, it's called a clean room. So sometimes there's a clean room implementation of things where if you have something written, a company or a group of people can kind of create a where they can prove they haven't looked at the code. They don't have that knowledge. They can rewrite a specification and it'll be legally copyrighted to them as opposed to where it came from. It is complicated.
And there are all kinds of lawsuits over that, especially with poaching. A big one was, I forget what company poached the employee, but they poached them through Tesla. And it turns out that, oops, that Tesla employee took 400,000 lines of source code and brought that over. And an exact copy of it was running in the company that hired him code. So
Oops.
that is a big no-no and got slapped with a giant fine on that. So you definitely, when you are hired as a software engineer, oftentimes there are in your employment contract, it will say, hey, if we're paying you to write code, we own the code that you are writing. That opens up a whole new issue of, well, what happens if I'm working two jobs, right? And so depending on how big of a company you are at, the company may have a mechanism that says, hey, if you state, I'm working on this project, it's not during company hours, it's not on company equipment, you can get into that. But that is the whole side of intellectual property, which does overlap with copyright, and obviously copyright overlaps with open source. So there is a Venn diagram there. Intellectual property is not exactly open source, but it is tangentially related.
100%. And like Red Hat is very open about that. Like the code I write, the code my teams write, the copyright is owned by Red Hat. But we have a lot of people that are involved in other open source projects. That's on their own. Like they own that. Other companies don't allow that. Other companies say, if you write code, we own the copyright to it. There has been lawsuits about that as well. So, if you end up getting involved in open source, and again, none of this should scare you, by the way, or I hope not, right? Like it's very, you should be able to find projects that are welcoming and, interesting and that type of stuff. And to your question, even off work hours. So it depends, right? So it absolutely depends. Some companies are very strict and their employment contract is, it doesn't matter when you're writing code, right? It can be very hard to enforce, but do you want to have that fight? Probably not.
Yeah, and it can get even more complicated of, well, it was off work hours, but I was doing it on equipment my company provided to me, right? And so that's a big no-no as well. And things can get really messy of, well, what if your employer doesn't provide you a laptop, so you're using your own laptop? Well, that's a whole nother can of worms to get into. So the best policy is never sign something without reading it, and never be pressured into signing something, right? So if you get a work offer and they go, you got to sign this and get it back to me within an hour, say, sorry, I need the weekend to read over this, right? Or I'll get this back to you tomorrow. I'm not saying you necessarily need an attorney to review everything, but it's always a good idea to know what you are signing. Oftentimes you will sign an acceptance agreement, and the acceptance agreement says, well, you agreed to comply to all of the terms in the employee handbook. well, where's the employee handbook, right? You got to ask for that to be provided to you. But the best scenario is that hopefully you're working with an employer like Red Hat or like an employer who is open to you working on multiple projects, right? And just being clear and upfront with them and saying, hey, I'm working on this side project. I just want to let you know and make sure that it's on record so that you know about it. And you can always ask your employer or go to HR or say, you know, hey, I'm working on this side project. I want to make sure that there are no conflicts of interest or any intellectual property issues. And they may come back to you and go, hey, we really don't want you working on another project. And here's exactly where it says in your contract, you can't do that. But it's a good idea to always lean towards more communication, not less communication.
Really great advice, because, and that's not to say, oh, don't ever sign, don't ever, like, that might be okay for you. It's a job, and they, you know, okay, well, I'm going to accept this, right? If you work at, you know, I'm not going to name companies. If you work at certain really high profile private companies, they will have a lot more control over what you're doing, right? And again, you have a community around, right, careers in code, and I'd say Syracuse.io and things like that, where you could say, hey, I've got a question for somebody. I got a contract, and could I ask somebody a question? Like, don't post it, right? That's a private thing, right? Because there's also rules sometimes about posting things publicly. But, like, you know, you might be able to get somebody to mentor you or talk to you about it. Excellent questions. Really good.
I got another one.
Sure.
So looking back, when you first started your career versus now, how did you or still dealing with like the imposter syndrome?
Sure. Try being a manager. No, absolutely. So the imposter syndrome, right? Feeling like you're kind of just faking it, right? You know, there's been times in my career where I felt like I knew all the answers and everything, you know, I was one of the experts. And there's times in my career I joined this amazing company called Red Hat, and all of a sudden I was sitting next to the person literally writing the graphics drivers for Linux. And I went, wow, I don't know anything. Right. And so part of it is just, if you're invested in yourself and you're invested in what you're doing and you're interested and you're curious, that's a really good way to be. Right. And I know that sounds very philosophical, but as a manager, I need to trust my team. I need to trust my architects. Right. I have my own opinions, my own thoughts, my own experience, but, like, so there is sometimes an imposter syndrome or feeling. Another thing I'd say is, don't be afraid to ask dumb questions, right? I do that all the time, and I say, listen, I just don't know the answer to this. I'm sorry, right? If they're good people, they shouldn't judge you by you asking a question. But that's definitely a good one. One good one, just, well, I know we're a minute over. I think is about the resume. How do you get open source contributions as part of your resume? It's really just like any other experience. So in your code or in your resume, you could put active participant in React.js with, you know, a link to React and, you know, five PRs accepted, you know, what they were about, right? That type of thing, or dates or that type of stuff. But just there's different ways to do it. Again, that might be something be happy to help people walk through as well.
Just as a quick little example of that, we built a content management system at work and didn't want to build a text editor from scratch. So we went out and used the one that Facebook actually uses on Facebook.com. So every time that you make a post or tag someone or, you know, type in a comment, they have open sourced their text editor as well. So there was this weird bug that we were running into where if you pasted something, it would actually paste the text in twice, but only if you were on a specific browser version and only on this one particular thing. And so I went into GitHub, I went to the issues, I did a search for that, nothing came up. And I'm like, well, I know I'm not crazy. I can replicate this. This can't be just me that this is happening to. So open source community being great as it is, I opened an issue and I said, hey, am I crazy here? You know, is anyone else having this problem? Here's exactly what it takes to reproduce it. And they came back and someone said, can replicate, can you fix it? I'm like, oh, I've never worked with that code, right? I dropped it in my own website and it just worked, so I was good to go. I started digging into the code and I went, oh, turns out I can fix this. All I need to do is put an if statement in here and it prevents the bug. So I opened that pull request, got reviewed, got approved, got merged. And about 2 months later, I was on Facebook and I went, I'm curious here. And I right clicked and inspected and went to the sources. And sure enough, there was the if statement that I wrote. So now that I have contributed that, I can say that I have written code that is running on Facebook.com. Seems like a tiny little thing, but a pretty cool thing to be able to brag about. Yeah, it was an if statement. It took me 15 minutes to add it. But because open source has those workflows open and is willing to take feedback from the community, especially when you're putting your money where your mouth is and actually contributing the code, the whole Git process makes it easy to pull that contribution in.
Yeah, I've always liked that example for sure. All right. Anything else for right now? Otherwise, feel free to tag me on LinkedIn or ping me in Slack if you have any follow-up questions, that type of thing. And hopefully I'll see you at Open Hacks in the future.
Thank you so much, Shay, for coming in.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Good luck with your final projects. Bye.
Thank you.
All right. So tonight is going to be a capstone work night. I will do a poll tomorrow to see if you would like me to finish up the How to Adult Part 3 or if you would like me to STFU about the about that. There were, I know, 2 students who had questions for their capstones tonight. Let's do attendance first. The attendance secret word will be open source. Go ahead and do attendance. I'm going to open the floor up to any questions about open source that you may have that you were maybe a little hesitant to ask Shay that I can weigh in on. And then if not, we will turn over to capstone questions. You are welcome to drop out of here and work on your capstone, or if you have questions, just raise your hand and I will come to you one by one. Joe, what's up?
Alrighty. I was trying to look while he was talking. I saw maybe 1 or 2. I don't really know how reputable they are. If I wanted to work on something that was like a open source like case management software or EMR or even like dealing with what is it, FHIR,
Yeah, so
stuff like that.
First things first, just because you find software doesn't mean it's open source. When you do find a project and it is open source, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're looking for contributors, right? So they may open source it and go, look, I made this software. I want other people to use this software, but this is just a side project for me. I want to only work on things that I want to work on, and I don't really care if anyone else wants to contribute. So the best way is going to their README and seeing if they have a contribution section, because they may have specific instructions around, hey, if you want to contribute, here are the things you need to do first. after if they have that, great, follow those steps. If they don't have that, go look at GitHub issues, because oftentimes those GitHub issues will have specific things that will say help wanted on them. And that help wanted means we talked about this, we agreed what the solution is on this. We don't have the time to fix it. So if a community member wants to spend a couple hours writing code to get that working, we will gladly take your pull request and review it and probably merge it. You may be using the software and going, hey, I found a bug here and no one's reported this as an issue yet. So I'm going to open up a new issue. And I've done that plenty of times as well, of going, look, I don't know how to fix this. I just know it's a problem. Can someone point me in the right direction and try and help me there? You don't want to do that too frequently, right? You want to be 100% confident that what you have found is a bug. But that can be a great way. Open an issue, have someone else confirm the bug, and then say, hey, or should I open up a pull request for this and wait for a manager of that repository to get back to you and say yes. What you don't want to do is go on a tangent and spend weeks and weeks building out a feature. Open that pull request and have the maintainers of that open source project be like, hey, this is all cool code, but we don't actually want to add that feature to our software. Or, hey, we need to set up test cases for this, or this needs to be talked about in the overall project roadmap. Or there are lots of things that can go wrong if you start working on that and end up having the contributor or the maintainers of the package or repository say, we don't actually want this. So you do want to reach out to them, make sure that they're open to you building that, and then you can go and do it from there. There is something called forking as well, which is actually how you get started on a pull request, where you can fork the code into your own repository, work on everything, open up that pull request, and that pull request might be open for months. So they may come back and go, no, we don't actually want to merge this in. Well, now you're in a situation where you're like, well, tough shit. I'm using my version of the code, but I want to use my version of the code because it's got the feature in it that I just built and that I needed. At which point you can actually merge in the parent repo into your forked off repo to keep it up to date. So that is another option as well. It doesn't mean your code will be merged into the official original repository, but it does give you a way to add your own things without necessarily getting them approved. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I was just kind of looking and seeing if how ambitious is working on stuff like that, and
Yeah, it really
if there's
depends
a
on
lot of
the
options.
scope of it, right? You could find a tiny little project that's got a bug with a help wanted, and you fix the bug, and congratulations, you're officially a contributor to open source software. Or you could, be in some giant project and it could take hours and hours to even find where the bug is or get comfortable with the code. And so, it could be your first open source contribution could be 15 minutes, or it could be 15 hours, could be 150 hours, right? Depending on the you could say, oh, the Linux parts of the Linux operating system and variants of the Linux operating system are completely open source. Well, that may be a little bit too big of an open source project to get started with, unless they have a really detailed guide of getting started or contributing. They normally, it's contributing.md, and they may actually have a very straightforward thing of saying, this is what we're building, this is what we need help with, this is how you could get started. So looking for one of those projects that has a contributing file can be a really good way to get started, or looking into software that you already know how to use as an end user, seeing if that is open source and seeing if you can contribute on that side. Other questions?
Well, I do have a question, but it's not about open source nor like Capstone.
Shoot.
I just wanted to know like what the heck was a like a trust fund? Like I don't know what that is.
Sure. So a trust fund is basically a way to pass money down through a generation um or to any, actually doesn't have to be a family member, but it usually is a family member, and there are usually some conditions around that trust fund. So my parents um set up a trust fund for me that said, hey, when we die, if I am under 30, they didn't want to pass down their inheritance to me and have me be a 21-year-old who's going to go out and, buy a car and go gamble money or go, blow the money. And so they said, hey, we don't necessarily want to give you your entire inheritance if we die and you happen to be 21. And so what a trust fund does is basically puts the money in a separate entity. You can think about it as like a special bank account, and that trust fund has rules tied to it. And it usually has a manager of that trust fund. So the way my parents set it up is they said, hey, he can't access that money until 30, but my aunt was the trust fund manager, and it was set up in a way that said, there are exceptions to this if he's buying a house for the first time, if he needs tuition to go to college, if there is a legitimate use of those funds, the trust fund manager could make an exception, take that money out, and distribute it to me. So a trust fund is basically just a way to inherit something with some conditions tied to it. And those conditions could be age-based, but they don't always have to be.
Does it always need to like have like I guess the person who's putting like the trust fund to somebody like do they like need the password or is it or they could just set it up where I put all this money into like my niece and she can't touch until like she like 25 or like out of like I guess a certain like time and day like she can't touch until like January of 2032.
There can be any kind of condition on it. So they can say they only get $1,000 a month, and that $1,000 a month they're only eligible for if they keep on living in the state of New York. Right. So trust funds usually have a disbursement schedule with them of, hey, you're going to get this amount of money this often, or they have some kind of trigger on them saying, hey, at this age, they get the full amount. Right. I think my parents set it up where I got a quarter of whatever I was inheriting at 25, and then I got the rest of it at 30. Right. Um, Ironically, I'm also my parents' executor, so I would be in charge of taking their money and putting it into a trust fund that would lock me out of being able to access those funds. But I've passed the 30 mark, so that is not a concern anymore. But there is also some tax implications that you can run into that a trust fund can help you get around. Um, and they say whenever you have kids and you're buying a property, you should consider putting that property into the trust directly because it can make probate easier. Probate is the court process that happens when you die, where basically the state will look over your will, will look over everything that the executor has done, and will approve it and go, yes, all of this is good to go. Now the money can flow out, and we can consider the estate settled, and we're done. Probate can be a long process that can sometimes be avoided, but it is state by state specific. And so trusts can also be used in that probate process where basically if you are setting it up in advance, it can help distribute those funds quicker. So yeah, I'm not an expert. I would not feel comfortable setting up a trust for anyone, right? Like that is something that you really want to talk to an attorney for. And it's also not a bad idea to talk to an attorney about a will, right? Especially if you have kids that are inheriting anything. It is worth having an attorney spending a couple $100s and actually being able to ask questions like that of, hey, should I be setting up a trust? Or are there any major life decisions that when they happen, I should go back and modify my will? There are certain things like, hey, I've written this will up, but do I need to get it notarized? Do I need two witnesses? Do I need two witnesses that aren't named in the will, but I don't need it notarized, right? There are all kinds of things in there where it is a good idea if you can afford it. No will, I'm sorry, any will is better than no will. So if you get started with an online tool and generate a PDF and print it out and sign it and get it notarized, that's totally fine as a starting point. But at a certain point, when you start building up your assets, it is only natural to think, oh, well, when I die, even if you don't have kids, where will this money go to? Right. And there are laws by default that will say, well, if you have parents, it will go to your parents. If you have siblings, it will go to your siblings. If your siblings have kids, but your siblings aren't alive, it will go to their kids, right? But in a will, you can really say anything that you want. You can say, I want 100% of my assets to go to this charity, right? And the charity can take care of it. But the point of the will is to say, this is what I want to happen when I die. And that may include details of the trust. And then you would also want to name an executor and saying, hey, when I die, this is the person who is in charge of executing on all of this.
And the trust, like, can it like build an interest?
Um, so the trust. Ooh. So the trust isn't really an account type. It is the legal entity that owns the assets in that trust. So a trust can be an owner of a property. A trust can have retirement accounts, or can have brokerage stock accounts, or can have savings accounts in it. So yes, it is possible for the trust to make interest, and it is also possible for the trust. There's something called an irrevocable trust, which basically means once I put the money in there, there is no way for me to get that money back as an individual. So I'm unfortunately not qualified enough to answer all of those questions. But trusts are just powerful legal protections to say, you know, I would like this money to be entrusted to this person with these stipulations, with these requirements around it. It's kind of like when you open an LLC, which is a type of business. The business can have a bank account, and the business bank account can earn interest on it. But when you file your taxes, it's a separate entity. It's the same thing, right? You own 100% of the business, but you have a legal line of separation. So if someone sues the business and goes, this business screwed me out of all of this money, they can't come after your personal assets, which they would be able to do if you were a sole proprietor or just using your social and signing your name on a contract. So an LLC is a really good idea if you're opening a business, or an S corp or a C corp, which get incrementally more complex, but also bring their own benefits to it. But I will stop that there because I do have a slide on that if we do the adulting part 3 tomorrow. Okay, any other non-capstone related questions? Okay. What is the meaning of life? 40, 40, 44, 46, 42.
I think.
It was 40 something. 44 is just ingrained in my head from SU. 42. Okay. Let's go on break now. Be back at 7:15, and feel free to raise your hand if you have capstone questions. If you would like to work on your capstone and not have me drone on and on about individual capstones, you are welcome to drop out. Yes, we did attendance. The secret word was open source. So go on break, be back 7:15. Feel free to raise your hand and we will dive into capstone questions for the second half of class. All right, whoever would like to go first on questions.
You could do Austin's first because I got a lot.
All right.
I don't even know what is. I don't know if you want me to share my screen. How the
Yes, share the screen.
yeah. Sorry. So I moved all the files over into my GitHub. And
Okay,
then
not that GitHub though, because
Okay.
that GitHub is your personal website. That's your GitHub pages. So we don't want it in there.
okay.
So what we want to do instead is make your back end and your front end their own repositories.
Okay.
So, right, Nathan didn't set you up for like one repository for both the front end and back end, did he?
I do have them as two separate.
Okay. So
Yeah.
that's what we should be doing on here as well. So it doesn't actually, no, it doesn't matter if they're in there because that's its own Git repository and Git repositories don't like being in other Git repositories. So if we just take these two and we move them back to your desktop, then we go to GitHub desktop.
I have that open already.
We basically want to tell it, hey, GitHub desktop, add local repository, which is going to come from down here. I see you have indeed angered the Git gods. Okay, this one is all set up and good to go, so that's not a problem. It's
Okay.
your back end that's going to cause the issue. So now your front end shows up here, no problem there. It's your back end. Do you have any objections to me deleting the repo on GitHub and recreating it?
I don't really. I just don't know if that'll mess anything up that I've done with like Fly and all that. Will it?
No, because all the Fly stuff is included in this Toml file.
Okay.
I hope. He didn't set up hooks, right? Where like all you still have to run the deploy command in the command line.
I believe so. I
Yeah,
did miss the last day. I was trying to catch up with that. And there was
Okay.
Yeah, I was just trying to reorganize so I could follow better.
So we're gonna do the back end. We're gonna take it up on its offer to create the repository. We will create that. And then if we publish this, I'm pretty sure it's going to give me an error and say this already exists. Yeah. So we're going to go back to github.com and we're going to just delete this repository. because you have everything locally. So we go down to the danger zone.
Yeah, this is the stuff I was like, I was scared to do. I wasn't sure how to do all that.
Git doesn't scare me. Go ahead and password in there. Or I could have done that. Okay, now that's gone. So when we go back to GitHub desktop, we can publish it. And now GitHub is happy with us. And you've got everything in here, so you're good to commit. Did you want your backend to be public or private?
I think Nathan said he wanted, or they should be public, right?
Probably a good idea.
Yeah.
So I screwed that up. Can you take me back to Chrome?
Yep.
Thank you. So if we refresh this, your backend should now show up. And then I just want to make sure this doesn't have anything secret in it. Nope, you're good there. Yeah, no. Just look in here and make sure. Good. Okay. So settings. Back to the danger zone. Change visibility to public. And you're good to go.
Good, thank you.
Who's next?
I should be next. Okay,
Go
so
for
I
it.
got a lot of stuff going on. So this is like my third, probably fourth version of this code. I
My
like
favorite.
I like lost some of it, and then I had to redo it, and then because I deleted a file off GitHub without downloading it first. So I'm like, why would I do that? So like, nothing works. Like I have like stuff in here that I like put in from like when I first started doing my capstone until now, but I'm just gonna go to my current
So
error.
yeah, point me at the code that is the closest to you want to get working.
Okay, so preferably this code, but it's like, no, not this code. Let me put it this way. Preferably this one because this is where most of my code is, but it's
Okay.
just like a mess.
Okay. Well, let's see if we can rapid fire through what a mess. So I'm gonna start after you give me remote.
I know I gotta change my A tags to link to, but then I also like don't know how to do that and keep my bootstrap tab is active kind of styling.
I'm just gonna pick a different port on this.
Yeah, that's oh yeah, like that. And then I
So
moved files into the library and then that messed stuff up.
okay, so let's work through these. In Okay, so only a couple of these. Clover in lib on inventory. So inventory. These will be easy. Go away. Come back here. All we need to say is go up out of the lib folder and then go down into images. So that should fix one of them.
What? So it tells it to leave the lib folder. I didn't know how to do that.
2 dots means go up one folder from wherever you are right now.
Oh, okay.
And then this one is still on inventory, use state and use navigate. What you talking about, Willis? They're right there. Oh, they're saying they're defined but never used. So we can just comment those out. And then this one is in maintenance. So we say go up one folder and then go down into images and Clover. And then it doesn't use the use navigate, so we can take that out. And it's not as big of a mess because it is now back up and running.
Okay. And can you help me convert my A tags to link to tags? I think that it's in my navbar, and I want to convert my navbar to like to do that layout thing, which I started in like a different file, so I
Okay.
feel like
So we'll start with these. All you need is the link. Actually, you probably want to use the nav link,
yeah.
which is built in because that will do this for you automatically.
Okay, so I don't need to do that. I got that from Bootstrap.
That's fine to do. It's just Navlink will do that work for you basically. And
All
then
right.
we need to change this to a 2. And then
I don't need that const probably, right?
I don't think you need. No, you don't need any of this. Navlink will take care of all of that for you. I mean, the way you did it is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just that it will do all of the work for you, so we don't have to keep track of it.
Yeah, and I don't want to have all of that. It makes it clunky, and I was like, I know I'm supposed to put the 2 where that href is, but I'm like, will that affect all of the active tab stuff I have going on? Oh,
So we can replace any time that it finds an A tag. Come on. With a nav link instead. Sure, it's a capital L. Okay. And then we can replace any closing A tag with a closing nav link. And then we can replace any href with a 2. And then we go find what we blew up. Link we don't need because we're using navlink instead. And it still, well,
it took me to a login page when you click inventory.
is inventory only accessible if you're logged in?
Oh, yeah, I did. I forgot I set that up.
So that's actually expected. And I think your active tab styling is still getting applied.
Yeah, that is. I see it.
Cool. So now you are linking and rocking and rolling there. And then the last thing that you would need to do is in app.
Like I kind of got a layout going on, but I don't even have the file. Why did I even do that?
mm,
What are you even referring to?
mm, mm, mm.
Maybe I deleted it by mistake when I transferred some code over from my last file. Yeah, no.
Well, I don't hate this.
I like it.
Would you like me to convert it to the outlet thing?
Yeah, I do. I was
Okay.
trying a different file. I was like, this is too much. I'm just gonna wait.
This is not a bad approach. I will say that. Like, it's not the official React router way of doing it, but it clearly got the job done. So it's not the end of the world. But what we do here is we say the path will be an empty slash. Oh, the screen share lag drives me crazy when I type. The element will be your layout. Do that as self-closing. And then the children will be all of these.
Yeah, all of my multi pages.
And I think if we throw that there, oh no. Do I need this and that? Aha. Okay. Then we can take your layouts out of all of these. You got to have so many pages. Okay. And then in the layout, instead of using the children, instead we save the children and use the outlet instead. And the outlet comes in from React Router DOM. Well, pow. You get your nav bar everywhere, and you still have your routes, except now they're simplified with just the elements.
That looks great. Okay, can we go to my login page? I want to know if I did that right for logging in. Okay, so I use non secure way, I think.
Yeah. Well, let's see if it works.
I tried to use Molter, I think, in this part. But
No. Molter is for uploading files to the backend.
oh, okay, so definitely not that. What's the other one? I think it starts with a C.
Well, your login is working with the inventory page, so that's okay.
Great. Oh, and can you help me get my plant seed data into this table? I've been trying. I'm like, what am I doing wrong?
Yeah, that's going to be the last one I can help you with, just so I can get to other people. What file is inventory? Oh, it's actual inventory. Okay, so I'm gonna look in your db.js. You're doing the seed stuff, so we're gonna assume that that's all in there. We're gonna go to server.js. You do already have the endpoint to get the plants. So the only thing that we need to do, do you want to do it right in? Oh,
Yeah.
You're on the right track. Um,
See all that foolishness I got down there? I need to do something with that. I tried to do authentication, but I was like, it broke. So I need to move on to other things.
Do you have? No, come on. No, okay. So we're gonna just keep it simple, stupid or shithead, take your pick. We're gonna use this one that's already here. So
Okay.
we're gonna come over here and we're gonna line that up to go to just plants, okay? And then you're gonna set your plants, so you were on the right track there. So the only thing that you need to do is generate this data based off of what you set into scope. So we're going to say, we're going to comment all of these out so we don't get confused by them. And actually what we should do is we should console log out our plants to make sure that we're getting the data we expect.
Okay.
So you go to console and we got our array, which got all of our plants in it. So that's good. So now all we have to do is actually use the data that we're setting in. So in order to do that, and this is a good thing for everyone to see, we're going to go to our plants and map over it. And we're going to tell it what do we want to show up for each plant in the database. We want a table row to show up with a key using the plant ID. I swear, if you looked at my typing on a screen share, you would think I was drunk. Okay. Now we are going to go ahead and borrow all of these and put them in here. We're going to cheat though and use the plant and also the index of the plant. Unless you want to use the ID of the plant. Did you want sequential numbers or did you
Yeah.
want the ID?
Sequential.
Okay, so this is going to be index. Nope. Yes, index +1 because index is 0 indexed. And
Yeah.
then this is going to be plant name. And then I'm just going to do one other one and you can fill in the rest.
Yeah.
Well,
I
I
see.
guess
I see them. Thank
so you're
you.
good to go there.
I can do the rest too. Now that I see how you did the plant one, I can just do that myself. Thank you so much. You really pulled me out of a hole because I was just digging.
No, that's what you do in the garden, not in your code.
All
So
right.
with that said, take a second. Do you have any questions about what I did? Because I know it's like rapid fire, but it's also important to like understand it.
I think the biggest question was about the plants.map. And then the index refers to like its location in the array or
Yeah,
string.
so if you use the plant.id as the row number, it's possible like if you delete a plant, your table would show like 1, 2, 4, 5, 6 if you deleted plant ID 3. So instead, what you do is you use index because the array will always be 0, 1, 2, 3, no matter what the ID is in the database. So I use index to basically say, just use whatever number this is in the array and then add 1 to it because otherwise your first plant would be 0.
Okay. One more question. Nothing that you need to fix, but about the layout again. I know I'm supposed to have a different
You don't
file.
have to.
Okay.
So I put it in I think it's in app.
Oh yeah, the JS.
So all the way up at the top, you've got your layout there. If you wanted that in a separate file, you could put it in a separate file. Do you want me to do that quickly just so you can see how it's done?
Really quickly, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. Do you want it in lib or outside of lib? Probably outside of lib, right?
Okay. Lib is crazy.
So no, your screen share would like to, okay, there we go. So in source, new file, we'll call it layout.js. We go, and this is again good for everyone to see how we can move components in their own files. We export layout and what
Export default.
yeah, thank you. What VS Code is a little bitch about is that it doesn't bring the imports over. So you have to go in here and go pick navbar out, which you think it would be smart enough to do, and other text editors can do it, but VS Code is like, no, I want to make you work for it. And then all we need to do here is import layout from layout.
And layout is not in lib, so do we need to do the 2 dots on that?
No, because it isn't in lib. If it were in lib, we would have to say ./lib/layout.
Okay, what's this new error back there?
Oh.
Um,
Oh,
there's
hold on. I was in the middle of trying to, but that shouldn't cause that issue. Okay, this is actually a different issue. If we go away from inventory and then this works fine and we go to another page, that works fine. Inventory though is breaking because, and this is another good one for everyone to see, it is trying to, in the plant table, this data has not been loaded yet. So what happens is when the page first shows up, it's trying to map over your plants and the plants aren't there yet because the API call hasn't loaded. So up here, we can say if there are not plants,
I'm seeing that.
and now when we refresh, no
Oh,
problem.
so you got to give it something to do while it's searching and making the connection.
Yeah, it gets to map, and it's like, how can I loop over data that I don't have? And it errors out. So that's why you got to give it this. Hey, don't try and do any of this table crap, including mapping over the data, if you don't have it. But once you have the data, ignore this and go do this instead, which includes the map.
Thank you so much. You can move on to the next person. That was a lot. Thanks for helping me.
Next victim, Joe. Terry, I'll come to you next.
Wait, why y'all come to me next?
I saw you unmute your microphone. Got eyes everywhere, baby.
Boy, take it.
Joe's is going to be a wild ride. I cannot hear you even though you are unmuted. Well,
Because I turned my microphone off, that would be why. Okay, we don't actually have to go through any of like the hard code or anything. I just kind of wanted to workflow this and see how I would approach doing the code for this. Maybe we
oh
can
no,
do...
I want to do all the code. I want to get a PDF downloaded and in the folder, baby.
All right. You insist. Do you... I mean, it's better to have it in the actual case manager. I don't really want to be dealing with like what I have in app scripts right now.
So what do you want to focus on? Do you want to focus on submit a form and have a PDF generate with that form data?
If you go to I don't have the local the dev stuff. If you go to myprojectdomain.com.
Give me a second. My dog is making noises I do not like.
You got your website up, Joe?
Yeah, everything's all deployed. Yeah,
Give me
deployed
1
it
second,
when...
guys. I'll be right back.
Yeah, you're good.
Sorry about that. My dog never throws up or makes noises, and she was making some crazy noises, but she's okay now, so it's all good. Okay.
That's good.
I can't believe you got myprojectdomain.com.
I know. We had this conversation before. I got really lucky. And I got josephmsmith.com.
Rub it in.
Both are like $10 each.
Rub it in. All right. What should I do when I go there?
Okay, so basically what I want to have happen is what I have currently happening right now is the form that I made last night out of spite. One of the supervisors for EI, not going to go into a lot of detail, but they sometimes get a little I don't really know what word to use there. Frustrated for no reason, we'll put it.
Okay.
So I was well ahead of a deadline, and they wanted it done in their own deadline that they made up themselves. And they've been doing that for about a week and a half. So I finally said, screw it, and wrote my own script to have it so that when the demographic information is inputted, all the letters are generated that I have selected based on, similar to how the form is in there.
Okay.
In the Google form. I select what letters I want. And that generates, currently it's pulling from a template folder and then replace, like doing just like a text.replace from those templates and saving it into a destination folder with, the name of the patient in there.
Okay.
So I don't know exactly how I can do that with actual PDFs, if it to make it cleaner, because I don't think I can interact with, like, I won't be working with Google's own software and whatnot. Like, I'd need to do it with a PDF, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to. What is this?
That is one of the most popular packages for creating PDFs. And here is the other. In both of them, you can use them to generate a PDF. The downside to PDFs is they're all pixel based. So you have to you can start with a base PDF basically and open that as a template. And then you can just say, oh, XY coordinates of this and drop in that information.
Is it pixel based or is it what is it, res based?
It is
What,
pixel based.
like the same kind of difference? I'm asking because of the same difference with front end design and pixel, like setting pixel distances versus relative distances or
No,
whatever that
it
measurement
is pixel based. It is not relative. There are a ton of libraries though out there. The other one the other approach that some people do, which is kind of interesting, is they make the page in HTML and then they convert the HTML page to a PDF.
That's what I've seen before. I know that I've used Fox at 11. I use that at work sometimes. I don't know if I'm gonna be down to pay like the 150 or $200 for it just to demonstrate my capstone, but
So
I don't even know if I can interact with it. Like, I don't know if it's interoperable between projects like that. If they have like their own API.
So
Essentially what I would like in an ideal world, I would like it so that when you go into the website and you go into the demographics page, when you're adding a new child and you fill out all the information, you click add child at the bottom. I'll add the other letters and stuff. You click what letters that would need to be generated, or maybe a pop-up screen right after you hit add child, and it'll automatically generate those, and then they would be saved as a PDF into their respective sections. So if you go into, why are none of my cases loading? There we go. So if you were to go into one of the cases from the dashboard, it would auto populate
yeah, so what you need to do is think through traditionally PDFs are generated with one of the first two libraries that I sent you, where it is a script. It is saying we start with this template. We know the pixel location of where the name should show up. And so we just drop that information in, and then we know the address line shows up 15 pixels beneath it. So we drop that in, and you just keep going until the whole PDF is filled out. And it will support paragraphs and stuff like that. But it is basically saying I need to script out the positioning of all of the elements in this PDF. The benefit of that is that you can then save that PDF either into your database or into a file path, and the people can access it directly. So that is historically done on the back end. The other approach of doing this is saying, hey, I can go in and I can click in view letter. And what view letter is going to do is generate out an HTML page and then make it so that you can print that PDF basically. So it's like a 3-step process. You hit generate on the front end, the generate makes the HTML page, and then the HTML to PDF.js converts the HTML to PDF. You do have to be careful though, because Node does not do HTML well on the back end. right? There is the entire document object model is not native to Node. So you can't interoperably just generate some HTML and then be like, hey, convert this to a PDF, because Node doesn't know how to display or render HTML. It only knows how to read it, basically. So you have to decide on that, because while I think the first two libraries are going to be more robust, they are going to be more work for you to generate each PDF. But the benefit of that is that it will be all server side. If you want to go that HTML to PDF.js route, that's okay, but you do have to consider the implications of doing that on the front end and sending it to the back end if that letter needs to be stored.
Which, I mean, ideally, I would want it to be. That you and I talked about form.io, and this was their open source version.
Yes.
What would that allow me to do? That's more in the lines of, isn't that kind of like a hybrid between the two, where I'm using their form creator?
As far as I know, form.io doesn't touch PDFs at all.
What are my other options other than PDF? Other than generating and generating HTML and then saving as a PDF or something, is there any other file type that I could do to kind of skirt around that for now? Or is it all just going to be working within those two?
It depends what the end goal is, right? You could export out a JSON file. You could have a .txt file. You could make a Word document if you wanted to. Google Docs is an option. You could dump the data into Google Sheets. You could only have it saved to your database and have that data viewable in a table in your app interface. You could save it out as a JPEG if you wanted to. You could, right? So it depends what the goal is. If the goal is to just make something that is printable, you can probably get away with doing that in just HTML and telling them to print out the HTML file. But if you're doing more complicated PDF layouts, you're going to either need to tackle the HTML to PDF or use one of the other libraries for pixel-based layout.
Is there a way that I can? No, because you need to sign into a Google account to be able to do that. Right, none of Google's APIs allow you just to use the Docs platform to create a file, even if you're not storing it within Drive, right?
Correct.
Okay.
A Word file will.
Would I need a license for that?
To open the file, but not to create the file.
They allow you to use Office 365 without, I mean, you wouldn't be able
Nope.
to read it, but
No. Create a Word file, not necessarily do it in their cloud.
how would I get access to using their?
It's an open source package.
Is it?
Yeah, because the docx file format is XML based and completely open source.
I did not know that. Would I? Can I even use? I can interact with that with JS, right?
Yeah, I just sent you the link to the package I've used to create Word files.
Okay. Because that could work. Because that's essentially what I'm doing right now. I can just attach it from. But you said I wouldn't be able to read. Can I is there another library I can use to be able to open docs files in my Capstone? To be able to get like a mini viewer or something?
No, because you can't open Word files in the browser.
What if I do a single sign-on with somebody's Google account and ask them,
So
and ask them if they want to create a folder.
you have to figure out what your goal is, because we can make any of these work, right? And PDF has plenty of options. Going through Google Docs has plenty of options. Doing a Word file has plenty of options. You know, there are plenty of things that we can do there, but we don't want to just pick whichever one is easiest. We want to pick which one is going to fit into the workflow and make the most sense.
Right. All right. So my goal is to, once that demographic information has been entered in on the demographic page, and after I select which letters I want, that will generate and then store it'll store a file that I can either have the option of downloading. And if it's a PDF, I can view it in the browser, but it'll be stored into the patient's account or to that
Okay.
case.
And do you want to do that as an HTML page that becomes a PDF, or do you want to make the PDF by scripting it by pixel locations?
Which way looks cleaner if you were to print it out?
Well, the pixel locations gives you more control, but it's also more tedious. So if you can make the letter look exactly the way you want it to in HTML, then that's the easier way to go. But it's more work to then take that HTML, generate the PDF, and upload it into the back end. The scripting route can be done entirely on the back end, which makes it easier to save the file, but more tedious because each input that you put in has to be coded for a pixel value.
Okay. How long do you think that would? I'll take a look at it. I'm going to go to the scripting route to be able to store it. I think that's going to be easier in the long run.
I would review the first two links that I sent then, because they were both very popular libraries. Read through the documentation on both of them and see which one speaks to you the most. Because that's going to be what the documentation is going to be way more important than the actual library, because both of them are wildly popular. So go through both, see which one makes, like, the example code and the source code makes the most sense, and then pick that and run with that, keeping in mind that it's going to be on the back end, not on the front end.
Gotcha. Which that means it's assuming that where I'm hosting the backend, that would mean that the files are secure, right?
Correct.
Cool.
Because you're going to store the files either on that server or in the database that is on that server.
Right. Right.
But working with files, server side in programming and full stack development is one of the most benign looking challenges and one of the most technical things to do to get right.
Yeah, that's why I don't know. That
They deal with buffers and it's buffers and encodings and, you know, getting things as a text and then converting them back out as the text in blobs and blanking on, there's one other big one out there. And then storing it is a whole fiasco because, you know, what happens when the server reboots? Well, do you keep the same file system? Is it virtualized? Is it stored in the database? You know, all of that stuff. Or, oh, I tested locally and I have all of these files, but they're all on a local file path. When I upload them to the server, the file path isn't going to be the same on the server. It's just not going to exist. So I would recommend, as a beginner, store the PDF data into the database as a blob data type, and then just write an endpoint where you can pass a ID of the file, and it will download that PDF from the blob through Express.
So don't even attach it into all right, hang on, just to make sure I'm understanding that part correctly. You in the V2 that you made, did we not have a file? Yes, we did right here.
Yeah, so
So
instead of path and type, I would just say file contents and make file contents a blob. And I mean, if you're going to do things other than PDF, like being able to upload images, then you can keep type. You can always add it down the road too.
yeah, I even from like a data management perspective, I don't think I don't know what NICE and EI Hub are gonna allow, but I feel like PDFs are usually the safer option because you can lock them.
Yep.
Easier to keep track of the metadata in them. So we'll just do PDFs for now. But okay, so then that would pull. Okay, I'll read the documentation to make sure I'm understanding how all that works correctly. So that sounds like a plan.
I'm just curious what happens if I
There is a new one out that I just started using. It's called O1, and it's for more intensive reasoning. And it takes like a minute to buffer, but I don't know, maybe it's all a hoax and they're trying to get load times down.
this may be, high in the sky, but okay, so this is our file table with the content type blob. It got the dependencies right, which is not a big surprise. Although I told it specifically to use Postgres, and it said, oh, Postgres / MySQL, which are not the same thing, and then said MySQL here. I don't know if you're going to need this HStore or not. Just don't know. PDF document, posts, create the document, add the page, draw the text based off of the coordinates.
And everything's on. Do I set those coordinates are the actual size of the document, right? And then so I set them there and then I work.
Yeah, so the documentation for PDFlib or the other one will tell you how to do, like, how to set it as a dot letter.
Right.
Or as a letter size, and then you'll be able to figure out the XYs of that.
Okay. This doesn't seem too bad.
Save it, get the bytes, create the PDF file based off of the bytes. Oh, yeah. Okay, so that's what's saving it into the database. This is where it gets tricky, though. Get the file, set it as application PDF, set it as download, which is what we covered, and then just send the content of whatever got downloaded. So that isn't as bad as I thought. And then the rest of that should be good to go. Yeah, so this isn't terrible. I'll throw this in chat if you want to reference it.
Yeah, thank you.
So that is a good workflow, and you can disconnect that from your front end and go, all right, let me just generate a PDF, save it into the database, and be able to download it all by using the back end. And then from there, you can figure out how to integrate it in the front end.
Sounds good. How long, what would you say would be the timeline on getting that workflow up?
For
I get
you or me.
for me.
I could do it before the end of class.
All right, so a few days for me.
I'd say you could probably get that working in 2 hours with ChatGPT's help. If that answer is accurate, I don't think it is as bad as I thought it was going to be.
Right, and I have all the back end and everything up right now, and I don't necessarily need to be able to go in and
just don't
make it pretty.
overcomplicate it, right? Like, don't try and worry about getting the files to show up on the front end for the user. Don't, like, just start with, can I create a PDF? Can I save it in the database? Can I see that PDF downloaded? Then you can go, okay, can I load in a template and then put data on top of that template? Okay, now that I can do that, let me write the database query, or let me make sure that the form that's getting sent in from the front end is pulling real data and putting that in the PDF. Okay, now that I can do all of that, how do I make the endpoint to show the downloadable files on the front end, and then use the other endpoint to pull the PDF and download it? So you definitely want to break that up into smaller steps. But if you try and tackle your workflow out of the gate, you're going to get tripped up at either generating the PDF, saving the PDF into the database, or retrieving the PDF out of the database, because those are the three hardest things. So if you get the three hardest things done first, then incrementally adding on top of them will be much easier.
Yeah, definitely learned my lesson from last night. I mean, app scripts and Google Drive are a cakewalk compared to building it a back end, but still trying to find out why something wasn't, running properly, or even.
Yeah, I mean, AppScripts is super powerful. It powered the entire admissions process before we moved to a platform called Pipefy. And the bot uses it every night to go get the name of class, generate well, the bot itself isn't an AppScripts, but it interacts with the Google Sheets API, which is similar to AppScripts in terms of like dropping in the YouTube link, reading out the name of the class, all of that kind of stuff. So it don't knock it. And I actually know people who have used the Sheets API as an alternative to a database, because they didn't want to just build out an entire interface around it. And so they just use that to store their data and made it viewable there and updatable.
TCG.
Well,
Alrighty. Yeah, millions of entries being run by app scripts.
give me 1 second to update the schedule before I forget. Okay, go ahead with your question.
Me?
Yes.
Okay. So I added a new row to a column, excuse me, to my database.
Yep.
And I did it through the code and through Beekeeper, but it's not popping up on my browser.
Okay.
And also, I also want to know, like, all right, so this is the way I added it in Beekeeper. Oh wait, I'm not showing you Beekeeper probably. Is there a better way for me to do it in the code instead of like going
Yes.
back and writing? Okay.
So all we need to do is in here. Nope. Okay. Use my favorite data type. And then over in db.js, all we need to do is in here, say alter true. And you don't want to leave that on all the time because it can lead to like data loss as you're playing around with your models. But if we go back over to, if you can grab Beekeeper for me. Thank you. Now when we refresh this, you can see I show up there. What I don't know if it will do is delete that. So if I take that out, oh, it will delete it. So because of that, you don't want to leave this on all the time. So what I do is I just take this and I leave it like hanging out in a comment. And whenever I need to run it, I can just move it inside of there.
Thank you.
Okay,
Now,
so your other question was in your plants. I'm going to just edit one of these so we can see that data. Or did you already add that to your seed?
I added it to my seed already.
Okay, so the reason why it's not updating the seed is because it's saying, hey, as long as there aren't any existing plants. Well, there are existing plants, so it won't update it. So the technical answer would be you could write some code with some logic to say, well, if the seed data doesn't match the data in the database, go update the data in the database. We could do that, and that would probably take until the end of class. Or we could get a little hacky and just, whoops, where did that table go? So if we delete the table, oh, it actually didn't delete. Drop, drop. Now it deleted the whole table, but what the code will now do is recreate the table with the sync and then go, oh, that table is now empty. I need to go recreate all of the plants, but this time it will have the location data in it.
Yes. Thank you.
With that said, check in your browser and make sure that's showing up because there may be some additional steps.
Yes.
Good to go. Of
Thank you so much.
course. Yeah, the way we're seeding the database isn't the most robust solution for it, but we basically do that check to say, we'll check to see if there's any data in there already. Anyone else have questions? Terry, go for it.
Yeah, I'll just share my screen. So.
Joe, it looks like you're writing into like the abyss right now because it blurs out the whiteboard.
Yeah, this is doing this thing, and I don't like how like the move is kind of like not aligned with this, like the middle not aligned with this. Like it looks kind of like weird.
Okay. You do know I hate CSS, right?
I do too. I just realized CSS is just not not my thing.
So, this is centered, so we need to fix the centering on the table. Okay, so that's centered. This is a table. The table has equal padding on it. So the problem is let's just try nope. I'm gonna minimize your back end. Oh nope, never mind. That's your front end.
Oh, wait. That's the wrong front end.
Oh, okay.
That's the one with the website, which that one I kind of need help with that too, because that's breaking. But yeah.
Okay. And I'm just gonna scoot this one over so I can switch between the browser. I think I'm going to. There we go. And just manually shrink that down. And then, so I don't think the problem is that the table isn't centered. It's just that this column is wider, and that's why it like feels unbalanced.
Mhm.
So I think if we go to combatant details, and I'm going to work with the first table here. And I'm just going to play around with styling here to confirm what I'm thinking. So if we do border, yeah, so it doesn't look like it's not centered because we can see where the edges of the table actually are. So what we could do to fix that, um, column width is done up in the TH. So what if we in table body, table row, table data. Do you want a table head that says like move buttons link, or do you want it to say like this? Like,
I
do you
never,
want a
I
header
never,
row?
yeah, I never thought of that. Yeah, yeah. I think I do want like the move, the button, and the
Okay,
link.
good, because that makes my life easier for fixing this problem. So we'll do a table head and a TR and then a TH that says like name, and I'll let you, obviously call
Yeah.
these whatever you want. Buttons, and then I'm just gonna call it video just so it doesn't say link, over and over again. And then up here, what we can do is we can say the width of this is going to be 50%. And I think that will balance it out a little bit better. And then we can take the border off, unless you like it, and then you can always add it back on. And that is still not centered. So what if I do better? What if we apply equal width to all three of these? Oh, I've angered the gods. Where did that come from? Get out of here. Oh, it would help if I put that inside the tag. So the problem that we had there, just to sum that up, is that tables will automatically size the size of the columns based off of some crazy formula. So because these names were a lot longer, it was making the name column a lot wider, but the buttons and video column a lot smaller. And because of the spacing of that, it wasn't appearing centered under the name. So what I basically did is I said, don't try and auto calculate the width, make the width of all three of these equal. And that is what made the centering in the columns work well, because all three of those stayed the same.
Gotcha.
Now, you will have to apply that to the special moves as well to fix that. But is that what you were hoping for?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. And like it's like one other big issue. Don't know what's going on. Like this is the actual like website itself. I don't know why this is not displaying anymore.
Oh, the font?
No, like the characters, like if I go back to like my local host and I click here, you know, it's like all the fighters is here. But when I go here, it's like it's not showing up. Oh, well, it even broke. Okay. And I guess the font too, but the font's not really not as important and the images like showing up. So I don't know what's going on with this one.
Is any of the content from your database showing up? Like, is it an image issue or is it well, it doesn't look like it's an image issue. Is there any other part of your website that shows, like, I think it's I'm trying to figure out if I'm guessing it's okay, so oh, is it just a cores issue? 404. Okay, so yeah, it's trying to do oh, well, this is a separate problem, but okay. Fighters. Yeah, okay. So the problem is, can you take me to the deployed front end code? The problem is in your combatants page. Are you sure this is the deployed one, or is there
Yeah,
another page?
this one is the website one. Oh, I think I forgot to switch the fetch because it's looking for localhost, maybe
Yeah, but
or Netify.
well, no, I was expecting to see something else in the hold on, give me 1 second. Ultimate
I'm gonna assume when you visit it, you don't see like the font too, right?
I actually see a font. No, I see the font.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. So what the version that is deployed right now, it is hitting the front end URL instead of the back end URL.
Oh.
So you need to put the back end URL in for every fetch to make sure that that is working right.
Okay.
And if you still are stuck after that hint, feel free to come back. I'm tomorrow, and I can help you with it, but I'm pretty sure that's the problem.
Okay.
Um, do I need to read up on how PDFs work? Would that be valuable to me? I don't want to get too in the weeds.
No, you should not look that up. You should read the documentation of one of the two libraries that I sent and just focus on getting a PDF generated.
So just do like a blank thing or like something with like hello in there.
Yeah. Just start with hello in there. Make sure you can download it. Make sure that you can associate that PDF with someone. And then once you can do all of that work and go, hey, when I submit a form that has this checked, it generates this PDF, it shows up in their file, and I can download it. Once you do all of that, then you can get into how do I start
Passing
with a
data
template, and then how do I get the data into that template?
Gotcha. Yeah, because this isn't creating a This is creating a blank page. However, I could do like, is that not the template? Or this would be the time. I just need to like write out the template and then save it.
No, well, what you could do is like if the contents of the PDF are the same and all you're really doing is dropping in their name, like up at the top of the address, you could load in an existing PDF and then drop your data in on top of it.
Right. So I would make the template with like, spaces for
Correct.
name, address, whatever.
Yes.
And then does that just essentially copy it, or does it generate a whole new
It uses
based
that.
off of a model?
It will be you'll start a new JS PDF, you'll load the template into it, you'll layer the data on top of it, then you'll save that out into the database as an entirely separate PDF.
Okay. Okay. I think I need to. I think I'm missing how JS PDF works, so I'm going to read that.
Yeah, you basically do a new JS PDF, you set the page size, you add your text into it, then you save the file, which gives you the byte stream that you save in the blob in the database. Yes, Terry, FlyIO is the backend.
Alrighty.
But that's what I'm saying is like, don't try and do the templating. Don't try
Yeah,
and like,
yeah.
Get that working, because then there's all kinds of like, well, what if the page size isn't right? Or what if it's a multi-page PDF, or right? Like that's a whole rabbit hole on its own. So just start with, I can generate a PDF and download it in the browser.
Yeah, thankfully the only things that I'm super concerned about for generating things that need to go in the mail are the letter to the parents, letter to the referral source, and letter, or no, that would be it.
Okay.
Because the checklist would be in it would be digitally. But those are the only things I need to print. So I really only need to do 2 then, or technically 3, doctor and a non-doctor.
Yep.
Cool.
Okay. We are at the end of class. Any super pressing, important questions that you guys have?
How many weeks we got left?
-1.
That's what it feels like.
Austin, did you have a burning question, or you want to save it for tomorrow?
Well, I had a question, but I figured it out.
Okay.
But it kind of had another small one.
Okay. Do you want to ask it?
It's a CSS thing. So
all right.
yeah.
Save it for tomorrow.
Okay.
And on a low note.
The problem with CSS is that it's either a 10-second fix, and I'm like, oh, you just set this property wrong. It's not center, it's flex end, and then everything works. Or it's like 30 minutes of me in inspect, and I'm like, CSS, why is this not easy?
Yeah, it's not a huge thing. It's just more like it bothers me looking at it a little bit.
Yeah. We'll look at it tomorrow.
Right.
Have a good night, everyone.